Hello everyone and welcome back to beautiful Maldives. It is Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today we're going to talk about updates to the Portuguese Golden Visa. This is something that we haven't talked about so much lately. Portugal was super popular sort of during the COVID period of time. Now we're past the COVID period of time. Portugal's become a little bit less popular for a variety of reasons, which I will cover in this video. But actually, I think that it has probably gone out of favor compared to what it should be, if that makes sense. So I'm going to explain a little bit about kind of the latest updates and where things are at, and whether it is perhaps something that is right for you in the near future, etc. So let's dive in and talk about it. Before we do, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notification bell. Welcome, I am Michael from Offshore Citizen, and myself and our team are some of the foremost international tax and relocation specialists in the world. And so we help people to figure out how to optimize their taxes, their asset protection, their kind of global structure, whether they're staying in their home country or they're relocating abroad. We help them to figure out what is the best solution for them, as well as implement that solution, getting residency permits and citizenships and forming companies, open bank accounts, etc. So if you're interested in any of that, please reach out to us. You can book a call with me, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer, link in the description below, or send a message through offshorecitizen.net. Okay, so Portuguese Golden Visa. So let's just quickly recap here. In the EU, there have been a variety of different Golden Visa schemes. Now, I think the important thing to recognize about Golden Visa schemes typically is they generally have a very low or no minimum stay requirement. And this is appealing because if you're in a situation where you have a high minimum stay requirement, for example, something like a D7 visa in Portugal, then you're going to be in a situation where you enter the tax net. Now, it used to be that people would want to go to Portugal and enter the tax net because there's the NHR and there were some favorable things that a lot of people could optimize their taxes around. However, the NHR, for those who didn't get in before the end of 2023, has been kind of nerfed. It's not a very good program at all anymore. And as a result, not so appealing. This kind of was one thing that pushed people away from Portugal. Certainly, they brought in a variety of different rules, first of all related to crypto, then related to the NHR, then some changes on the Golden Visa, etc. That kind of, again, it's just sort of lost its popularity, even though actually in terms of ease of getting it, I mean, it's as easy as ever to say get a D7, it's not changed in that regard, etc. But, you know, the Portuguese tax system is pretty bad, and it will be interesting to see how the NHR for the people who are already in lasts for 10 years. After those 10 years, when people choose to stay, or will they go as taxes go way, way higher? I think it's maybe okay for people who are retired and, you know, don't have a lot of ongoing income, but especially if you have earned income, really, really terrible. Anyway, this led to, you know, there's a variety of other options. So Spain has a Golden Visa. It was typically more expensive, and citizenship takes 10 years. Italy kind of has a program, but not really very good, and it still remains not very good. Greece, their program became much more popular in the wake of that. It's cheaper, although they've, in certain regions, raised the price a bit. Malta has a program for certain people. That's been popular. Now, since those things have taken place, Hungary has announced a new program, and I'll talk more about that in future videos. But this kind of gives you a little bit of the tapestry of what is going on in Europe. And so a big part of the reason why it was very popular to go to Portugal under Golden Visa is that in Portugal you get citizenship after 5 years. Now, in reality, it's not truly after 5 years because A, you have to go through the application process on the Golden Visa, which is pretty extensive. Usually you're talking about in excess of a year these days. Then once you qualify for the 5 years, it's going to take maybe a couple more years or something before you actually get the citizenship. And so, you know, you're really talking about 7 or 8 years before you actually get the citizenship. This being said, we're talking about a really valuable passport that otherwise, I mean, you could go to, there's a couple of European countries, Malta, you could buy the citizenship. We do unofficial citizenship by investment in Hungary, which is maybe a bit more attractive than Malta, but opens and closes and isn't available to everybody and things like this. So that's something, if people are interested, you can reach out about that. Otherwise, typically you have to live in the EU. Even if you have a Golden Visa in some place like Greece, they don't like to give away their passport. So on paper, yes, maybe you can get it, but not really an option. Someplace like Spain, you're talking about 10 years, and in a lot of cases, they don't allow dual citizenship, so that's not nearly as attractive. Malta, basically because they sell their citizenship, they don't want to give you citizenship through residency. Cyprus, there's a Golden Visa program, but again, they don't really want to give you citizenship through that. It's very involved to qualify. So hence, there's just not a lot of options unless you're actually willing to go and live in the EU or marry somebody from certain select countries that you could get an EU citizenship. And an EU citizenship is effectively like $1 million asset. You can kind of think of it that way. And so in the case of Portugal, you have the ability to make an investment and spend a minimal amount of time in the country, although to be fair, a lot of people like spending a lot of time in the country anyway. During the time when you have the Golden Visa, you have Schengen Visa, so you have access to the Schengen zone, which is cool, and you can come and do well on the other side. So what has changed? Well, one of the big things that's changed is real estate's basically off the table, including more or less real estate funds that used to qualify off the table. There is some sort of cultural contribution thing, but generally that's not a great way to go in these cases. There's some ideas that things are opening up in that regard. This is something we're trying to research and understand the criteria for because it's a little bit nebulous, but in theory could be kind of cool. This being said, I think the fund options have in some regards improved quite a bit. And this is where I think it's probably worth it for a bunch of people to consider whether they would want to do a Portuguese Golden Visa. Now, to be fair, there's a lot of funds that I think are a disaster. In fact, I think most of them are not particularly good. You'll have programs that I would just view as being quite high risk, so there's a decent chance you'll lose some or all of your money, and not because of the fact that it's mismanaged, but because the nature of the investments are not particularly solid. This being said, in my view, we've gone through and assessed in quite a bit of detail pretty much all the funds, and there are, I would say, like 3 funds out there that can be very solid for what it is that they offer. And in some cases you have liquidity, which is kind of a concern that a bunch of them have, and so that's also awesome. So basically you just have to think of this as saying, okay, I can put my money into a bond or a stock portfolio and I would hopefully get some sort of return on it, or I could put it into one of these Portuguese funds. Now, what are the things about this? It'll be euro denominated, right? You are, in most cases, not all cases, but most cases, taking on an illiquidity function where basically your money's locked up for, realistically, the period of time that you're going through this, so probably around 8 years. And so that's something that, is not necessarily that great, but on the other hand, it could be a little less. Let's say 6 to 8 years, somewhere in that period. And you need to be able to sustain it for the period that you have the Golden Visa, and then of course you want to be able to apply for permanent residency and citizenship on the back end of it. On the other hand, if you say, okay, well, let's just imagine my ROI. If I'm thinking I could invest my money into, let's just say, an ETF of the S&P 500, right? So an ETF of the S&P 500 will most likely, over time, outperform most of the Portuguese fund options for a whole variety of different reasons that I won't dissect now. But generally speaking, your rate of return, just on average, obviously nobody can predict at any given point in time the volatility that's going on there. And some of these illiquid investments certainly would have lower beta, or essentially lower volatility. And so there is something to be said for that. Often they provide some cash flow. It's not a huge amount of cash flow, but some cash flow. So if you just compare, you're like, okay, great. Well, what do I get for that? What I get for that potentially is a citizenship worth basically $1 million. That's not actually a terrible exchange, right? If you sort of value an EU citizenship, which could be for you and your family, right? So if you have kids, then they're going to have EU citizenship. They can go to EU schools. They can use EU healthcare. They have freedom of movement and ability to work in all these countries, et cetera. Like, you're getting a fairly major benefit for people who are interested in EU access or an EU passport that gives them access to other parts of the world. So say I invest 500,000, which is the investment. Okay, so the investment in the Portuguese Golden Visa is a 500,000 euro investment. It used to be for funds 350, then it went up to 500. By contrast, yes, you could go to Greece and you could buy property worth 250,000. You could go to Malta and you could do this sort of indefinite thing where you basically lose the money, but it's quite a bit lower. You could go to Cyprus and put 300,000 in. You could go to Hungary and get in for less. But basically none of those are really leading to citizenship, right? So you're just kind of tying up the money. So here you're tying up the money, although, again, assuming you're going to tie up the money anyway, right? Then you're saying, well, what am I getting in trade for that? Hopefully I'm getting, hopefully preserving my capital. And so this does matter on fund selection. So we spend a lot of time going through the funds, doing a lot of due diligence to figure out what is the best fund for people who want to preserve their capital. My view is always return of capital before return on capital. That being said, hopefully you get some sort of a rate of return. It's not unreasonable to expect that over time, the funds that are safe would typically return maybe an average of 5% a year, right? So it's less than the S&P 500, which, historic average is around 9%. Again, any given year it can be up, any given year it can be down. Right now it's high, therefore, maybe it will perform lower. Returns are not guaranteed, right? But you're trying to maintain some reasonableness. So let's say you do have an opportunity cost. Yes, there are some fees involved in doing these things. There's government fees that you have to pay that are fairly expensive for the Golden Visa. You're talking about kind of initial setup, but you're gonna have to pay some legal fees, you're gonna have to pay some fees related to the government stuff, etc. So you're gonna be in it for 10,000 euros or something. But now on the back end, if less than 10 years later, you get an asset worth €1 million, right? That's basically like a 200% return on your investment. So even if the money did nothing for you, but you get €1 million return, that's like really good. If you kind of consider that rule of 72 in 7.2 years, you would 10% a year. In 7.2 years, you would double your money, right? Here you're talking about basically tripling your money, and now it's not actual monetary return, right? But on the other hand, you're getting this thing that has a long-term value that basically nobody can take from you in the future. Yes, to qualify for that, you do have to pass the Portuguese language test. So during that, what's called 7-year window, you need to learn enough Portuguese to pass that test. And certainly that will take some time. The good news is they have changed the rules in Portugal to make it a little bit easier to get the citizenship. And this has to do with when the date that you get to start counting from is. And so now they count from the application date as opposed to previously like an acceptance date. And so that gives you a little bit, it compresses your time frame a bit on when you will qualify for the citizenship. Now, there is a slight risk here, which is they could change the rules in the future, right? We're saying, okay, fast forward 7 years, I'm gonna get this passport. That's great, but maybe they change. I think that risk to reward, if you've got the money around and you're looking for a high quality citizenship, it's not really a bad deal. Okay, what's the worst that happens? If you did a proper fund, and again, I would exclude most of the funds, but like I said, there's at least 3 that I think are quite solid. If you do a proper fund, then you're in a situation where you get your money back. All right, so you had opportunity cost on that money. That's worth something, for sure. But in the meantime, you had a Schengen visa, you had access to Portugal, you had all this sort of thing. And the probability is fairly high that you will be able to qualify for the citizenship on the back end. And if you do, amazing, right? Then you've got this lifetime asset, not just for you, but for you and your family. And for your family, that could extend to big long-term benefits. So I think it's something that a lot of people should probably consider more. I think, like I said, just observing from clients, Portugal has become less popular. People are talking less about it, etc. But with respect to the Golden Visa, I think that's mostly unjustified. I think when it comes to the Golden Visa, you actually probably should still consider it. So let me know what you guys think. Put it in the comments below. If you want help with this or relocating to any other particular place, please reach out to us. And I will look forward to seeing you on the next video.